uh, do the horse race numbers and talk about, who's winning and who's not. We do each electoral college as well as the popular vote. So I'll talk a little bit about the differences there. But Polly is also, because of the way we do things, and I'll go through our methodology first before I get into the results. Because of the way we approach it, we're also able uniquely to see what are the issues in each state that are driving changes in electoral college district votes. So, so that's why I asked Shannon to come on, because he's really kind of living this day to day, whereas I kind of look at things from a higher level. So we call what we do augmented research. It's taking market research to the next level. We work with leading Fortune 500 companies. We do a lot of work in healthcare. What we do is human behavior research. So actually the election stuff we don't do. We never take contracts from political parties, because we do a lot of work with the public service, with statistics bodies, with healthcare bodies like Health Canada. We do work with the American government as well. We have a lot of American clients. So that's the kind of, because we do that kind of work, that kind of policy work, the stuff that we do for the election is really to show our customers, et cetera, that Polly is always right. We've done over 20 elections worldwide and referendums around the world, and Polly has never been wrong. So let me take you through a little bit about our methodology, a little bit about us, and then we'll go straight into American politics. So what is it we're solving with artificial intelligence, and how is it an improvement on what we have known since the 1950s? Market research really started in the 1950s with phone polling. That methodology is sound. It uses randomized controlled samples of populations. That's the same kind of sampling methodology that you use for research in healthcare. So for example, when you're doing drug trials, right, you're going to test in one market, test another market, well, unless you're trying to rush through a vaccine, but you're going to do randomized controlled studies of populations. You don't get people to volunteer, you get random samples because you want to make sure it works on the average person. It's the same thing with market research, and it has to be repeatable and reproducible 19 times out of 20. So that's the advantage of doing that randomized controlled sample. You can do all that statistical work. The problem with that kind of sampling when it comes to phone research is that you now have a very low participation rate. It often takes a week or two to get enough people in your sample to do something that is statistically valid. And you're getting more and more, you're getting the same people participating in these things: older, white, middle-class people, slightly actually above average income. What you're not getting is new people, immigrants in the population, certain racialized groups. You're not getting in these because they're less likely to take these polls. They're expensive, and you're really spending your time on right party calls, people not answering, instead of doing the statistical work because it's so hard to get proper samples. What happened in the last few years is we've seen social media listening come on to try and fill that void. Social media listening has a number of advantages: huge data sets, which is irreplaceable for a scientist. Near real-time data, so you don't have that lag. You're not working with lagging indicators. The problem is they don't know how to do that randomized controlled sample for social media listening. So what you end up with is vanity metrics. You're not getting the answers that you actually need. You're not getting the insights. You're getting bounce rates and clicks and likes, which is, you probably know if anybody works in marketing, that's long-term not very valuable. So what does AI bring? We're calling it, it's in the scientific community, social sampling. So it's taking the advantages of what you get on social media. So all of our samples are from social media. We can also do other online sources for different things. We do work in security and all sorts of things. But for the purpose of this election, we can do any platform: Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, TikTok. The point is you will get the same results regardless of what platform you're using, because you are getting that representative sampling. Just like when you do medical research, if you do a trial in Mississauga and you do a trial in New York and you do a trial in Oakville, you would expect to get the same results. If you don't, then there's something wrong with your approach. Same thing with marketing. So it combines the statistical rigor of representative samples with big data. Everybody in our team, like Shannon's with me here today, has either a PhD or a master's degree, knows exactly what they're doing with the statistical samples. So this is a very scientific approach. Our AI was actually developed over a 5-year period at the University of Ottawa and licensed to advanced Symbolics. And as Marie-José said, leading brands, this is not out there science. This is in the world today, used by leading brands, Disney, which we don't have on here, but McDonald's, Toyota, MasterCard. These are just some of our customers, just to give you some confidence that this is mainstream and used by leading brands. We're also very well known in media around the world. We were the official pollster here in Canada, the Canadian Television Network, CTV and TVO, for the Canadian and the Ontario election that happened just recently. With the Canadian election, bang on. I'm just going to show you a clip from a documentary in a second. Polly not only called the popular vote, it was a very, very close election, a minority government. She got it within 2 seats. That's like saying within 2 votes in the US. So she's able to do each district. She got it within 2 seats for the leading party, 3 seats for the secondary party, and got all the issues right. And you see here that we've worked with the BBC. We've also been in American media for Polly's insights. Here's a clip from a documentary in the last, and again, this is just to give you some confidence. In the last election, we were actually followed around by a documentary film crew before the election was announced, and they compared us to leading pollsters in the country for the Canadian federal election. They had us all say on camera who we thought would win, who was Polly predicting, who were the others. We were the only ones who were able to call the election, and not only that, but get it bang on right. So this is coming out October 17th. It's going worldwide. It's already been bought by Britain, France, Germany, I think the US as well. So I'm just going to play you a little clip from it to show you some of the traction that Polly is getting. Hopefully you can all see that.
Traditional polling has struck out on several recent election predictions.
We're going to win the White House.
What if there was an AI that could predict the outcome of an election?
If ever a bombshell hit a Canadian election campaign, it happened this week.
What was she seeing that everyone else in the world was missing?
She can see patterns that we can't see ourselves.
Does that mean you are ready to conclusively call this election?
So they call that documentary Margin of Error. I myself have not seen the documentary yet. It's coming out October 17th. As it alludes, as I mentioned in the beginning, Polly that's not the only election that we've done. We've done over 20 elections or referendums, including the last US election. We said in August that Trump was likely to win that election. We got Brexit right, one of only 16 pollsters in the world to get that one right. A whole bunch of Canadian elections, and of course, most recently, the Canadian federal election. Polly has never been wrong since she's gone commercial. So why augmented research? What is the advantage of doing this approach? Well, AI is able to get your traditional demographics and psychographics. We can do that as well. We can divide up the population by ideology, by age, gender, race, all sorts of things, psychographics. But we also have some additional advantages. One is sociographics. So each of us, most of us, are in a social environment. So asking us how we're going to purchase things, what places we're going to travel to. For example, I'm a historical traveler psychographically, but where did I go for my last March break? I actually went to Disney World. Not a place that I love to go to normally, but because I have kids and I want to do what they want to do. So it's always very important to understand people in their sociographic context. We are also able to read what's called digiographics. Digiographics are those breadcrumbs that you leave in social media. What things do you click on? What do you read? How much time do you spend reading things that are critical of Joe Biden versus things that are critical of Mr. Trump? You might not say like or what have you, but we can see what you're doing. By the way, we don't collect any names. All of this, that's a whole other science, anonymity, differential privacy. We're only interested in trends, not what is Marie-José doing. But we are able to follow those digiographics. Sometimes what you don't say is as important as what you do say. We know what you've been exposed to. If you typically like things and then there's something you choose not to like, that tells us something as well. All while maintaining privacy. I won't get into the privacy stuff here, but happy to answer those questions after if there are any. In addition to the digiographics, the sociographics, we have huge sample sizes. Our sample for the American election is just under 300,000 Americans. It's longitudinal, meaning we're following the same 286,000 Americans throughout not only the course of the election, but we can actually go back to 2012 to see how did they vote last time? How do they feel, and what changes their mind? So do they change their mind as different news pieces come out? That gives Polly, the AI, she's able to grok all of that. A human being could not possibly process all of that information, but she's able to follow everything and what changed and map it all out. Conversion and attribution. So you see when you look at social media listening, you get likes and clicks and heartbeats and all these kind of things. Polly actually looks and sees what changes your mind. She does that analysis to say, when is something going to be a tipping point? We don't pose any questions, so we're getting people in their natural environment. We're just listening. That's the part that's similar to social media listening. There's no opt-in bias. People will often opt in because they want to give you their opinion, and here we're picking the people. It's a randomized sample. There's no self-reporting bias and no methodology bias. We don't have to weight things differently because we got 300,000 people. The sample is perfectly balanced. We've got enough Black people, Chinese people, everything in the sample, so we don't have to do any weighting. And it's in near real time. I have to say near real time. For most of us, that's real time, but it does take time to like publish it to the website. So you're always like a few seconds behind, but we're certainly not, you know, days behind the way you are with a traditional poll. So we're seeing exactly what changed. We can watch the debate and we can see how people are changing their mind through the debate. So we're getting rid of these vanity metrics, right? Bounces and clicks and likes. Those are proxies for what you really want to know. What you really want to know is, in the case of consumer market research, how do I make my brand number one? What will lead to higher sales? How do I become a new entrant into the market? Those are all things that you're able to answer directly with AI. So you don't have to do brand health studies. You just, how do I make my brand number one, right? Let's cut to the chase. Message testing, what message is going to work best for which audience? Attribution, where should you put it? In which media channels? We can tell you if you want to talk about fracking, do it in USA Today or whatever. We can get all those channels. What leads to conversion? What content causes people to actually buy versus click and reach, which is what you see here in the conversion slide. And then a change point analysis. On any given day, there could be 200,000 more people on the internet than the day before. So the fact that 5,000 more people visited your site may not be significant. A change point analysis tells us whether or not the change is significant, whether or not you have to pay attention to it. Very, very important when we do polling for elections. We are able to follow customer journeys or how people change. So this is just a slide that we did from electric vehicles, where the first thing, cost of an EV, very important during the general awareness time, but as you get into the dealership and when you come to buy, it becomes less important versus charging station availability. So just to give you that example, I won't go into here into conversion, I did that. Polly understands all languages as well. So we've done, we actually, at first she did only the 1-byte languages, like English, French, all the Latin languages. And then we sponsored research at the University of Quebec to buy the 2-byte languages. So Arabic, all those kind of things. We've actually had competition for text analytics on 2-byte languages. We went up on a worldwide competition. We were first in the world. Stanford University was second, for all you folks on from the United States. So Polly understands all languages. Now we don't understand all languages, so when we work with people who want us to work in other languages, we have to get it translated. But we can definitely get all the sentiments and all that. So now that you've had the introduction, and happy to answer any questions on that at the end about the methodology, let's get to the meat of it, why we're all here. What's happening in the United States? Very, very volatile situation right now. I know you can't read so what we've got here is October 6th, 7th, 8th. What's been happening the last 3 days? October 6th, now watch, what I want you to look at here is the popular vote, Biden and Trump. It doesn't change over these 3 days, but take a look at the Electoral College and how that changes. On October 6th, earlier this week, 195 for Trump. Look at that, a 17 vote jump in 1 day and 24 hours between the 6th and the 7th of October. What happened there? President Trump, well, we all know he had his COVID thing and his miracle cure. And then, but the big impact here was the stimulus, when he snuffed his nose at the stimulus spending. What I found really interesting here, the media here were certainly saying, what is he thinking? He's going to be alienating people. Wow, he knew what he was doing, okay? Because what he did He basically said, I don't want to give money to those democratically run states that are just that have mismanaged COVID. He coupled that with, hey, I had my miracle cure for COVID. And that resonated with people, certain people, particularly in some swing states. In Florida, we saw Florida, very important state, a lot of electoral colleges. It's a swing state. A lot of retirees in Florida. They're not as dependent on the stimulus spending. A lot of them have incomes that are independent of the current state of the economy. Plus, they're older and they really like the fact that Trump, who's 74, managed to, it seems anyway, get over his COVID issues. So that really resonated with people. The day after the vice presidential debate, again, a 3-point bump. Pence won that debate. I know there's been a lot of, did he or didn't he? Polly says he did. Now, not by much, 3 electoral college votes. What was the main thing that helped Pence there? He resonated with centrist voters, those people in the middle who are still deciding. The left and the right have decided, but those swing voters in the middle liked Pence. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the live up-to-date thing from today. Hopefully you can all see this. So on our website, and you can go to this yourself, it gets updated every day, advancedsymbolics.com, US election. Here we have an interactive map of the United States. And as you click on the state, so I'll go on Texas here, it updates the issues and shows you what's important in that state and what, you know, what the votes are in those states, which way they're leaning. So the interactive map shows you the red is the Republican, the blue is the Democrat, and then the ones that are kind of light blue are swing states. So here we see Florida, etc. So you'll see here today, Trump has come back down from his high of 215 seats. We still very clearly see this as a Biden is in the lead, and he's been consistently in the lead. And it is going to be very hard for Mr. Trump to catch up. But there are some sleeper issues that I'm going to review now that could help Mr. Trump, you know, at least close the gap. And we definitely saw that in the short term anyway, that was working this week, and that gives Polly a lot of ammunition to figure out what those sleeper issues are. So I'm going to go back to sharing my slide deck. Let's see if I can. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. Hold on a sec. Second. Maria say I seem to have lost. Oh, here we go. So share screen. Sorry about all the back and forth. I just have to. So hopefully you see that. So looking at the presidential debate from October 7th, here's some interesting insights that Polly was able to see. Now you can see the graph, there's lots of them there that we were tracking, but just to highlight a few. While the Trump taxes generates a lot of discussion, it generates the discussion among people who have already decided to vote Biden. It generates discussion among left-leaning voters, so it's actually not helping Biden at all. So if we were advising Biden, and we're not, we would say, put that aside because it's not helping you. The people who are undecided don't actually care about Trump's taxes. We find that's true in most elections that we monitor. We've seen a lot, I could talk to you a lot about budget things, and it kind of goes over the heads of average voters. And, you know, so I won't get into why, but it's not helping Biden. Conversations about Biden's age are not helping Trump. They did originally. So originally the whole Sleepy Joe thing and questioning his senile, you know, whether or not he was going senile and things like that did help Trump, but it actually came in Biden's favor during the presidential debate because people felt that Biden didn't come across as having, you know, he seemed to have his thoughts well ordered. He didn't come across as Sleepy Joe the way, and maybe he would have, because he's not a great debater. He's not as strong as Trump on stage, but Trump had spent so much time planting in people's minds that the guy was kind of losing it, that when they saw him and saw that he was able to keep his thoughts straight, it actually helped Biden quite a bit. We saw people on the right saying, you know what, this guy's not so bad, you know? Some sleeper issues, there's quite a few of them, but vaccine is the number one. If Trump can come up with a vaccine before the election, and we know he's trying very hard, I think the second best thing, because he's having trouble getting the vaccine, is this Regeneron thing, which we didn't have when we had this data because he hadn't had that thing yet. But I think he knows that a vaccine or medicine that's going to help you if you get COVID really works well for Trump. Now, will it continue to? He's come down from it, I think, because people are starting to question whether it's really helped him because he's had his coughing fits and stuff. But if he can continue to convince people that he's going to power this through and get a solution to this, that will really help. Another problem for Biden, he's not very popular actually with the far left. They're kind of upset that they didn't get Bernie Sanders. Kamala Harris is helping with that. We saw in the vice presidential debate. Some good issues for Biden are race issues. He's seen as being extremely credible on that. And that really does matter to all Americans. It matters to white Americans as well as Black Americans. It's no longer a fringe issue, it's a mainstream issue. So that's what's really working well for Biden right now. And Shannon can go into that later if there are any questions about that. Polly is also able to track all the things during the debate. So the high point for Biden, you probably guys know this by now, will you shut up, man? Stand by, Proud Boys, all that kind of stuff that, you know, Polly sees that too. She sees it in real time. And the stuff about Biden's son, you know, et cetera. So let's go into the VP debate, which happened October 8th. What did we see there? We saw that Pence is helping Trump more than Harris is helping Biden. They're both a credit to their team. But I guess Harris is not as much of a surprise, whereas Pence came across as a nice foil for Trump among people who hadn't really been exposed to Pence very much. We found, you see here, we're looking at left of center, center, and right of center. Look at that big bump in the red for Pence. He really polls well with center voters, those undecided voters who are very important. They really liked Pence, and he gave them a big bump. To the point whereas if we were counseling the Republicans, which again we're not doing, we would say get Pence out more, get him out more, especially with the centrist voters. He doesn't play as well with the far right voters. Trump's got that one. People on the right like Trump. He's got his followers. So the two of them together could get a good swath from center to right of center. Very good engagement on the VP election, 10% of the whole population. This is not just 10% of our sample. Because our sample is representative, it translates to the whole of the United States. So we're looking at about 10% of the whole population were engaged on that debate, which is actually quite high. However, COVID is even higher. So that remains the dominating issue of this election. We do have all these other issues though, which, you know, maybe I'll save for the Q&A thing, but the stimulus was a huge issue this week. COVID, of course, but Black Lives Matter coming in and the Supreme Court, Trump taxes, but like I said, that's really on the left. The center isn't as concerned about it, and where they are, it actually helps Trump, ironically. So probably want to stay away from that if you're a Democrat. So by looking at all of the issues, and they're all on our website, so while we don't consult with parties, if they look at it, they can get the insights. They will know what they should be focusing on, what's helping them and what's not helping them. We kind of feel that the Republicans seem to have a better view of what helps them than the Democrats seem to have. Again, during the vice presidential debate, able to look at all of the issues, the fly on the head, all of these things. As much as that got a lot of traction, it didn't really help the Democrats in the election. I got a lot of questions in the media when I was interviewed the next day, whether Harris saying, "Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking." There was a lot of debate about whether or not that was good for Harris. It was good for Harris. That did work very well, especially because of the way the presidential debate had gone on. And the next one that was very good for Harris is, if Donald Trump asked me to take the vaccine, I won't do it. As much as Pence tried to make that sound terrible, it actually resonated with people. Looking by partisanship in general, this is interesting. The right, we find talking more about Harris during the debate, and the left talking more about Pence. So they're talking about the opposing candidate. So what this shows us is it's really hatred of the other that is driving votes rather than love for a particular candidate. Okay, this is really a vote against rather than a vote for. That's what that kind of pattern tells us. And then, so today, so I'm going to actually ask Shannon to go off his microphone because he lives this day to day. And I'm going to ask Shannon to talk about what's happening right now as of this morning with the states. Are you there, Shannon?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So this is exactly from this morning's data. So hot off the presses. So it's I haven't had a lot of time to delve super deep into exactly the issues everywhere, but what I'm presenting here, I guess, in this first slide, I want to show how we can, not only can we see the changes day to day, but we can really see the changes where those changes are happening state by state, which can be kind of important. So this plot is showing, it's showing the change of the average number of electoral votes we predict each either Biden or Trump to have. Now keep in mind, obviously in reality, in each state, one of the two candidates gets all the electoral votes, but at the moment, in the states that are very close, statistically, right, we're not sure where all those votes are going to be, and so those states change back and forth, and we can see where the big states are by the ones that are colored the most. So, for example, today we saw 15 electoral vote jump for Biden, and you can see the darkest blue. So the biggest jumps for Biden happened in places like Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina, Ohio, and so this is why we call these states swing states, because these are states that have that are pretty close in terms of Biden versus Trump, and have enough electoral votes that when they do change a bit, we can see a bunch of states, a bunch of electoral votes switch over to Biden. Notice not like homogenous, it's not like every state suddenly moved towards Biden today, though. Overall, Biden had a good day, but we still see that in places like Alaska and Colorado, those states actually, over the course of today, moved towards Trump. So different things are happening in different parts of the country. And if we look next, once you know, right, what states changes are happening in, we can also look at what the issues are in that particular state, and it can be different. Although states roughly match kind of what the issue salience is at the national level, there can be very significant differences. So what I'm showing here in this plot is in each of those 4 states that showed the biggest change towards Trump, what were the issues in each of those states? How were they affecting the vote in that particular state? And so there's a lot of issues here, and I haven't had time to really deeply look into the why of everything. I should say one of the nice things about our sources of data is because it's social media posts, so there's a lot of actual qualitative data in. If we do have time, we can actually go in and look at exactly what kind of general trends are people saying that's contributing to these changes. But unfortunately, this is just today's data, so we haven't really done that deep dive yet. I guess in terms of one issue we can highlight, if we look at one of the issues that has the biggest bars probably is you'll see something called Trump positive for COVID. So this is basically the fact that Trump has COVID. And this is an issue that's still actually quite relevant. It's kind of resonating with people as it's still in the news, but you'll see it's actually having a different effect depending on the state. So in Arizona, this is helping the Democrats. That's why it's blue. So in Arizona, the majority of belief is that this is an indication of Trump's irresponsible behavior, those kinds of things. But if we look in North Carolina, we see that same issue can actually help Trump. And so generally when that issue is helping Trump, it's because people are sympathizing with the president. There's a natural reaction to sympathize with the commander in chief when he has a terrible illness. And so in different states, you can see the issue changing differently. And a lot of that has to do, if you look deeper into who is talking about the debates, right? Or sorry, the issue. Is it right-wingers who are really engaging on this issue, left-wingers or centrists? And depending on what groups are really activated by that issue will change how that issue is affecting the overall vote. So yeah, that's all I really wanted to go into just for now.
I find it interesting, Shannon, that healthcare is Republican across all of these states.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Which would seem to me to say that Trump's whole thing about I found the cure and I'm giving it to everybody for free is resonating, at least in these particular swing states, which is where he needs to resonate.
Yeah, and actually I'd say another reason why I believe we do see healthcare trending towards the Republicans. Keep in mind, this is not a chart like we're usually seeing of just like what people's opinions are. So you could ask someone, oh, do you think Democrats or Republicans are better in healthcare? And they might say Democrats or Republicans, and that's useful information. But here what we're actually seeing is the effect of that issue on the actual vote and how that issue can affect the vote. And so it can be the case that maybe a lot of people do kind of like the Democrats more in healthcare. Some do, some don't. But it might be the case that when we talk about healthcare more as a nation, that is pushing other issues aside that are actually better for the Democrats. So I think partially what we're seeing here is that healthcare is an issue that kind of does go back and forth. Some people hate Obamacare, so that helps Trump. Some people like Obamacare, that might theoretically help Biden. But when you're talking about Obamacare, which may not be a big driver of people's votes really in the end, you're not talking about, for example, the pandemic crisis, right? And that can actually help Trump, because politics goes a bit more towards usual issues, and that can actually end up helping the person who when we not think about the pandemic, makes us feel better about him. So there's these kind of effects where partially, like what you're seeing is in fact, how much is this issue actually driving a vote versus just whether it makes you feel good or bad about the Republicans or the Democrats.
Yeah, and that's a really important point where, like Shannon said, we're not saying that they think the Republicans are great on healthcare across the board. It's how is it affecting the vote? These issues are how it's affecting the vote, not healthcare as a topic, generally speaking. But what's important about this one is that in the vice presidential debate, Kamala Harris spent a lot of time trying to say that we're better for healthcare because et cetera, and Trump is stealing that away from the Democrats. It's obviously something that they wanted to run on, and at least in the swing states, which is where it matters right now, it seems to be going Republican, at least today, and that might change. So it signifies, if you're in the Democrats, you need to do something about how this is moving right now. So if there's anybody here who's working on, either the Democrat or the Republican ticket, if you're working with these parties, this is what will help you as a strategist figure out which way the tide is moving and where you need to focus your energy. And very clearly here, I think healthcare is something that the Democrats need to focus on. Okay, so I am going to, because we ended up spending more time than we said we would during our presentation, open this up to questions now. Oops,
Yes, I have some questions for you, Erin, from the audience. In fact, can you just go back a little bit and talk to us about, so Daniel Dufour and Marc-André Nantais are asking question about about poly and the methodology. So how do you pick people, and if they do not know they are part of your sample? That's one question. And the other is how different poly is from Cambridge Analytica.
Okay. So the first question was, how do we poll people if they don't know we're part of our sample? Was that the question?
How do you pick people if they don't know they are part of your sample?
Yes. Okay, perfect. Okay, so how do we pick people? And I'll probably get Shannon to do that one, because we have an algorithm called conditional independence coupling, and that's our sampler. And so here are the main things that the algorithm, it's called the KIC algorithm, conditional independence coupling, looks for. It's very important to make sure in our sample that the people in the sample are independent of each other. Okay, so we're not going to have Marie-Josée and her cousin and her neighbor all in the sample, right? So Marie-Josée represents a demographic. We want to make sure that other people in that demographic are not friends and family of Marie-Josée. So it's important that we have those degrees of separation. We want to make sure that the people in our sample are average people for the purposes of something like this. So we don't want people who have 50,000 followers. That's an indication to us that they're not normal. So we don't want journalists. We don't want campaign workers. So we're following the same methodology that a traditional market researcher would follow when choosing who's going to be in the sample. We want to make sure that not everybody in the, we want to make sure we have a good representation of different races, different cultures. So for example, and so it is random. So she crawls the social network and she'll pick, say, okay, here's Shannon Davidson. Well, we already have enough white males who are in their 30s in our sample. So we're going to throw Shannon away and look again. Okay. And then we get this person, and this person is indigenous, and we don't have enough indigenous people in our sample, so let's keep that guy, but let's make sure he's not related to the other indigenous people we do already have. Okay, so it's a big algorithm. That's actually what took us the 5 years to develop, to make sure that you're properly sampling and you're getting a good representation of the population. Because if you don't get that part right, it doesn't matter how good your analytics are after that. It's just like if you were going to do research on the effects of, early childhood nutrition on IQ. You don't want to be picking all people with mothers with PhDs who make $200,000 a year, because then you don't know if the IQ is because the mother was smart. You have to make sure you get moms who are not very smart, moms who are smart, so that we isolate for the effects of the nutrition. Same thing here. We have to make sure you have people from all walks of life, all persuasions, but it does have to be randomized, not people who put up their hand and say, I would like to be part of your research. How are we different from Cambridge Analytica? Well, first of all, we're accurate. That's the main way we're different. We actually did research, and I did a lot of media interviews on this. Cambridge Analytica did not affect the outcome of the US election. How do we know that? Because Polly actually predicted the last, US election, and she got it right. So it's not because it was the will of the people. What did Cambridge Analytica do? They said they did psychographics. They basically did psychographics. What they did was they violated people's privacy. They targeted individuals. It was not randomized controlled sampling, so you can't actually get a proper poll when it's not randomized controlled sampling. They targeted individuals and then tried to learn everything about them, called micro-targeting. What car did they drive? Gave them all these surveys. That is actually bad science. It's not just bad policy, because it violates people's privacy, which is bad, not against the law in Canada, but bad. But it's actually bad science, because micro-targeting actually doesn't work. There's a whole, I'll give the analogy of, there's two types of people who do prediction in the world, psychics. And so one of them is psychics. You go see a psychic, she tells you, Marie-Josée, you're gonna meet the person of your dreams, You walk out of her tent, you get hit by a truck, her prediction is worthless because she was predicting you. There's another profession that does prediction. They're called actuaries. An actuary will look at you, Marie-Josée, and say, you look fantastic. Your parents live to 107. We're going to give you $1 million life insurance policy. You walk out of the office, you get hit by a car. They've just lost $1 million, but that's okay because they've got 30,000 more people like you. Okay, so they are going to be right 95% of the time. And that's the science that we're in. We're doing actuarial science. People as individuals, their lives change. They're very chaotic. Okay, so you might have had people sign up for this webinar today. I guarantee you at least 6 people didn't show up who said they were going to show up. Now, I can't tell you which people, but I can tell you that some of them, I can tell you with 95% confidence that 5 or 6 of them did not show up. Okay, it's just the way the world is. So when you're doing population trends, we can predict that. When we're trying to say, is Marie-Josée going to show up to the, well, Marie-Josée is going to show up for sure, but is Frank going to show up to the webinar? I'm more certain that Marie-Josée is going to than that Frank is going to, simply because of, Marie-Josée is hosting it. So when you're looking at population trends, you're going to be a lot more accurate. So that's why we're more accurate than Cambridge Analytica. And a very important point, we do not violate privacy. We do work for Health Canada. We've been on Parliament Hill with the Privacy Commissioner. We use K-anonymity, which is the same thing that Statistics Canada uses, and we layer it with differential privacy, which is actually a layer above what Statistics Canada uses. So we take privacy very, very seriously. We don't even collect names. So if you were to break into our servers or what have you, we're collecting demographic info. We're collecting trends. We're not tracking what is Shannon doing all day. We're just looking at what the general population. It's the same thing that any pollster does when they do research. They don't write people's names on the survey. They do random calls and they ask you what you think. They don't care what your name is. It's not important.
All right, thank you, Erin. I have questions from Bill Dunlap. What is the impact of the early votes and the mail-in votes, etc., the mailing votes and in the predictions?
Thank you, Bill. I think I know Bill Dunlap. Shannon, do you want to take that one? I think you're better equipped to take that one from a science point of view. The effect of the mail-in ballots. Well, I'll tell you very high level, we worry that the mail-in issue will favor the Republicans. One thing I forgot to mention in this is that questioning the integrity of the election generally helps President Trump. So when Biden or Biden's team questions whether or not the election will be tampered with or taken seriously, those undecided voters in the middle that Polly says are likely to vote likely to vote Biden if they show up, are less likely to show up and vote because they question, well, if it's going to be tampered with anyway, why should I bother? Like, these are the people who may or may not show up to vote. If they do, they'll vote Biden. But again, so if we were consulting with the Biden team, we'd say, don't question the integrity of the election, stay away from that issue. But we thought that it would help. Shannon, you tell me which types of people, given the COVID environment, are more likely to vote by mail. And I don't know if we've looked at this, but are more likely to vote by mail. And so which party would that favor?
All right.
Yeah, so
okay, go ahead, Shannon.
Sorry. Yeah, we're seeing that issue kind of. It's tricky because it's actually changed over time. Originally, we saw it seemed like there was a case where Republicans were going to show up and vote possibly in person because they were instructed that COVID was not as big a deal, or they were generally seeing that. And Democrats, it seemed like, were more likely to mail in their ballots because they were tended to be statistically more concerned about COVID. But as the election has gone on, there's been, I guess, a strong push from the Democratic side to have everyone vote in person if possible, or and vote early instead, and things like this. So at the moment, we're not really seeing that as an issue that's going to particularly favor one side or the other, as far as we can tell. And so we're not finding that as a significant impact on the prediction the model is making.
Okay, thank you. We have many questions, so I don't know if we can touch on, maybe answer a little bit quicker, maybe, if we want to have I have 5-6 questions. So is there, for now, is there any global risk that could help Trump in the campaign, or what Polly predicts about this? And this is from Angelica from Brazil.
Great. Shannon, I'll let you take that one. Global risks.
Well, if it could help Trump, I mean, so as a nonpartisan company, we're not trying to help particularly either candidate, obviously. So I mean, both campaigns can certainly look at the data that we have publicly and use it to their advantage. And so hopefully the whichever campaign is more data savvy and uses our data correctly will benefit from it. And so hopefully that is everyone's preferred candidate, is the candidate who has a better team at using our data.
We think right now what's helping, I mean, and it changes, like we said, COVID, it's helping in some states. And I think the key thing here is some issues help in some states and not others. And that's what makes this really complicated. Like when Trump jumped by 17 votes, that was only 1% change in opinion. And it affected 17 electoral votes. So it's hard. Sorry, Shane, it is hard to answer that question without sort of getting into who does it help and why, and we'd almost have to run a scenario, which we can do. We'd have to know the issue and run. We can do scenario testing with Polly. We can say, imagine this happens and see if it happens, but we'd have to actually run it. Otherwise, we'd just be giving you our opinion. Sorry.
All right. So I have 2 questions from Marc-André Nantais. One of the main critics from 2016 election was the failure of the pollsters, such as everyone had Hillary winning. Are the traditional posters used by traditional media changed?
Yeah, it's definitely changed. And so what happened in the last one, it was really an issue of, well, there were a lot of issues, but when people looked back, some of the polls, they weren't properly weighted. So the problem when you do phone polls is eventually you have to publish the poll. And if you don't get, say, enough black voters in your poll, like they found that Hillary had a lot of problems with that she thought she had the black vote. She just kind of assumed she did because she had 1 or 2 blacks who said, I'm going to vote for Hillary. But in fact, she didn't have that vote. And we saw that. We saw that in the results. The way we correct for that is we don't have to do weighting. We don't have 3 people who are representing their whole demographic. We have 300,000 people in our sample. It is properly weighted already. So we don't have to use tricks to kind of, or make assumptions that way. So things that's really the big advantage here. A, that it's a huge sample size. B, it's not opt-in, so you don't have that bias. And C, longitudinal. So we're looking at the same people over time. So we get to know them really well and understand what changes people's view. Now, it's important to understand we're not telling you how these people vote. They are representative of the whole population. So because it's such a large group and it's so they've been picked for their representativeness, it does tell you what the population as a whole is feeling.
All right, thank you. Another one from Marc-André. Seems like what tipped over key states for Trump in 2016 was not main cities like metropole, but rural cities. Trump won those ballots by a far higher margin than Romney over Obama, which pushed those states for the Republican. Is it still the case in your data?
Shannon?
Yeah, so that's accurate. And this year, effectively, we're seeing Biden the lead because it does seem like he is doing well, not just in the city. So of course, nowadays there's a very polarized electorate where very rural areas tend to go very strongly Republican, and very urban areas go very strongly Democrat. And so the interesting area to pay attention to are kind of areas in between, like suburbs and kind of pseudo-rural, in places like, for example, up like Pennsylvania, which is I think we see as right now the most likely state to be a swing state vote this election. And we do see Biden doing specifically better in these kind of, suburban kind of, or even semi-rural areas compared to how Hillary did last year. Yeah, because again, going back to kind of the big mistake the pollsters made in the last election, right? The pollsters are pretty good at getting like national votes, right? So the pollsters did in fact get the national popular vote correct in the Hillary Clinton-Donald Trump election. It just turned out that what's more important than knowing, like, or as important as knowing, which way people are going to vote, you need to know where they're going to vote. In the system like this. And so we have a lot of experience with this type of analysis. Similar in the Canadian context, it's exactly the same, except that instead of states of millions of people, in Canada, you have to look at these areas called ridings that have maybe 100,000 people. And so when we correctly called the Canadian election versus the pollsters again got the national vote pretty accurate, but the national vote did not predict who would actually win the election, because Polly's able to see kind of where people are making those votes. We're able to actually predict not just the popular vote, but who's actually going to win, which is, what you really care about.
Thanks, Shannon.
Bernie Forestel is asking, I'm a direct mail guy. Is there a way to help the poll information, to take the poll information, overlay it with geographic data and send physical mail to areas that are mostly likely to resonate with a message?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of our main, and hi, Bernie. That is one of our main applications for Poly, is to figure out, in areas, and we can go into census metropolitan areas where you're more likely to get resonance than in other areas, and actually tell you, don't waste your mail on this one, because you want to get the return on investment, right? This is the area that's going to be most receptive to this right now.
There's Alan asking, can you walk through how you would determine the impact of the fly on Pence's head?
Shannon, I know you looked at can you tell us, did that have an impact? I mean, I know it definitely had an impact. Lots of people talked about it, but did it change?
Yeah. No. So yeah, exactly. So there's two things, right? So you can see how much people are talking about something, right? Which is something we can do, and almost anyone can do. And so we do look at that because it's interesting information. And so a lot of people were talking about the fly on his head. But the analysis, when we talk about how issues impact elections, we're not just looking at how much people are talking about it. We're actually building a model that correlates people talking about an issue to how it's changing votes. And so I got to say, I don't think we did not run the actual issue of the fly through our analysis. But I did not see any evidence in any, I guess, similar issues that it was having an effect. It's the general issue of how people felt about Mike Pence seemed to be incredibly positive after the debate. So in that sense, I'm guessing the fly, I mean, maybe it helped humanize him. I'm not sure. I'm guessing it was probably mostly irrelevant because Pence did generally very well in that debate.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, you're doing a good job. We have Niall. I don't know if you can read it, or I can read it again. Yeah, so as it stands right now, do you think there is any reasonable chance that Trump can win the election based on your figures shared this evening? Today, well, maybe you're somewhere else in the world, Niall. yeah, he's in Bangkok, I think. It looks clear that Biden will clearly win the popular vote. Will it be enough to win the Electoral College? Is there any issue such as a miracle cure for COVID coming along that is substantial enough to change things in a major way in the next 3 weeks?
So first I want to say, check in with us on the 30th. Be sure to, because that's going to be, as we get closer, the prediction gets more accurate. But Shannon, what do you think? I'm not seeing a Trump win right now, but what do you think?
Yeah, so I think the question is correct in that, yeah, it seems very likely that Biden will win the popular vote. However, we definitely still see a chance for Trump to win the electoral colleges, especially because there are some issues that we can see have strong correlations with how people vote but just aren't affecting the election right now because people aren't talking about them a lot. So the vaccine is probably a really good example of that, where we can see in our data that like that correlates to how people want to vote, but it's not actually changing the vote right now because people aren't, you know, talking or excited a lot about a vaccine because it doesn't exist yet. But presumably if a vaccine did exist, suddenly people would be very excited about it. And we see that strongly correlates to how people are going to vote. So that's an issue that could push the vote in a strong enough direction to actually give Trump a victory if the vaccine rollout goes somewhat well for him. So yeah, we definitely see still possibility for Trump to win the election, but it will require a major issue that will change the election in a major way. So we're not just going to see drips and drabs of the vote kind of slowly shift to Trump. There has to be a significant issue change for this to happen.
Great. Thank you.
Roger, I don't know if you prefer your question 2016 or this one. I will ask for this one if you don't mind. Roger from Phoenix. What does Polly say about the likelihood that Trump will peacefully leave office if he loses?
I don't think we need Polly for that. He's definitely not going to bow out gracefully. You know, what we're really tracking for us is, because, you know, it's hard to predict what Trump's going to do because we're not tracking Trump, but we can definitely tell you that the more that we say that, you know, it might not have integrity or it might turn out to be violent or what have you, the less likely. Well, Shannon, you said it goes back and forth, but it definitely affects who's going to show up to the polls and how engaged people feel. So I think it's got a bigger impact right now on the electorate. But yeah, I doubt that he's going to go out gracefully, but Polly's not doing that kind of prediction. That's his mind, which I don't even know that Polly can read that.
All right. Klaus is asking, do you have any idea how those people voted that used early voting?
Shannon, have you done could you do a model on that first of all? I don't know that you have, but.
No, so it's difficult to determine for sure because as you, that's a subset, right? So it'd be a smaller population of people. So it'd be higher uncertainty in terms of that measure because we'd have to look at we'd have to, you know, build up. My sense, like I was saying, we did done like some kind of analysis, basic kind of looking at the issue over time. And our general sense was that it didn't seem to swing, like it wasn't an obvious correlation. I guess there wasn't like a much stronger direction that early voters were voting one way or the other, such that we thought it was worth putting that into a model as like an extra parameter. So our general sense, doing some statistical analysis, was that it was not early voting wasn't strongly enough correlated with which party you're voting for that it will be worth putting in the model. But again, it's hard to make as precise a prediction of that as we can of the total vote because we're dealing with a smaller sample there.
Yeah, we'd have people who would have to say, I've done an early vote, and so you get smaller, and so your uncertainty. So, yeah.
Okay, let's take one last question from Elora. Do you find that voters crystallize their intention ahead of time, or do intentions change constantly until the very last day of the election? In other words, can Polly predict the election a few days in advance or only the day of?
So just like the weather, always the prediction is going to be more accurate the closer you are to the election. Some people are completely decided, and we definitely see that in the data. Like I think it's something like 29% are Trump supporters, and that's just not going to change. Doesn't matter unless he's, you know, not around anymore. But then there are always that group in the middle, and that's the group really that's up for grabs right now because there are diehard left and right, Democrat, Republican, and what they're really aiming for now is that centrist vote, that group in the middle that haven't decided, and it's a substantial number. It can tip the election. There's enough of them that it can tip the election, which is why we can't call the election right now. It's very volatile still. So it's always going to be more accurate. That's why when we were booking this, we said to Marie-Josée, okay, we'll do one on, you know, the 9th, but we definitely have to get one closer to the day because I don't want to be held to the prediction that we made October 9th. A lot can happen between now and then.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was such a fascinating presentation. Thank you so much, Shannon and Erin. I just want to say to the people on the line that we have another CASACADEMY before the 30th. So on the 22nd at 9:15, we have a CASACADEMY in French on, employees' motivation. how to, help them go through November, December, January, especially here in Montreal. So I look forward to seeing you there, and thank you again, everybody, to have participated so passionately today. And thank you again to Erin and Shannon. So see you all soon, very soon, in 3 weeks.